and welcome back to another episode of Real Conversations about Aging Parents. This is your host, Rebecca Tapia. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to go off on a little tangent and talk about the Greenland shark. If that sounds surprising to you, I understand. I totally understand. So I was not spending my time well and somewhere in the depths of the internet and came across an article, and it discussed the Greenland shark. And the title of the article is How Old is the Oldest Living Greenland Shark? And the estimate is that the oldest known living Greenland shark is about 400 years old. And okay, I'm not like, I love nature. I'm not like a nature enthusiast. And I honestly was this many years old when I realized that any kind of animal could live to be 400 years old. I was not tracking that. And I was thinking, yeah, I know there's a lot of trees that are much older than that and other non-mammalian objects, but this is considered the longest lived vertebrate on record. And so these are very, maybe cute in their own way. If you see a picture of them, don't know that they'd be like a common stuffed animal or something like that. But I wanted to talk about them because I immediately, when reading about the Greenland shark, started thinking of ways that this correlates to aging parents. Now, our aging parents are usually not 400 years old and they don't live at the bottom of the ocean, but I thought there were some interesting things that started to pop up. So before we get too far into that, the first thing is just the sheer lifespan of the Greenland shark. So some are estimated to have gotten closer to 500 years, but at least on record, the oldest one is about 400 years old. As they mature, they reach kind of their teenage young life years at 150 years old. And their cruising speed at the bottom of the ocean is about 0.7 miles per hour. So if you think like a brisk walk is 3 miles an hour or 3.5 miles an hour, walking 0.7 miles per hour would probably feel uncomfortably slow. And for them, this is part of their energy conservation and how they end up living so long. They're known for developing poor vision later in life, so having some sensory problems. And they're typically found in the Arctic or North Atlantic oceans, very, very deep down towards the bottom of the ocean, and very, very cold water, which is what contributes to their overall very low metabolic rate. So they move slow in very cold water. And this slow and steady approach is what's thought to allow them to live much longer than normal vertebrates, including humans. Largely, though, they still remain a mystery. They are very elusive, very hard to study. The oldest specimen was 512 years old, and that was only estimated through radiocarbon dating. And so, yeah, incredible, right? That there are these technically just fish like swimming around at the top of the globe, at the bottom of the ocean, living, 500 years or so. And so I was thinking about this and also just thinking, man, I just need to learn more about, the world and stuff around me. But that said, there were a couple of ways in which this made me think about aging parents. And no, I'm not saying all aging parents are like 500-year-old sharks in the North Atlantic Ocean. So one of the things that struck me was obviously just the incredible length of their lifespan. But also what popped in my head was really, I had this thought of like, wow, they've seen a lot. And then I was like, well, technically they're in the bottom of the ocean. They probably haven't seen very much. And then also they mentioned the poor eyesight. So maybe they haven't actually seen like sensory wise that much. But I just mean, as being a part of living beings on this earth for 500 years, wow, they've lived through a lot. And although the Greenland shark may not have seen a lot, aging parents, one of the things that really always strikes me as something I want to know and learn more about is clearly if there's an age gap between you and a loved one that you're caring for, it's very likely they've seen more than you've seen. They lived through things that you've only heard about or read about. And that kind of reminds me of when we took the kids to the 9/11 Museum in New York a couple years ago and how hard it was to explain to them ahead of time what that day was like. And then what a beautiful and masterful job that museum did at explaining it to them, where David and I could not quite put into words what it was like to live through that day. So if you've never been to that museum, it's extremely sobering, very difficult, especially if you were alive to see that, but an incredibly beautiful and one of the most creative expressions I've seen of grief and history kind of put together. But anyway, and so just going to the 9/11 museum and me trying to tell them what was going on and then being able to go through it together was really helpful. But when I'm around people that have seen a lot, one of my favorite things to do is to randomly throw out historical events and see what they were doing and what they said. Like, I have a patient right now who was 14 during Pearl Harbor, and I got to sit down and just ask him what it was like to be alive when that news came across at that point, a radio. And he told me he remembered, I mean, he was only 14 years old at the time, but he remembered thinking immediately that he was going to go to war, at whatever point that was, that whether it was just a couple years from then or eventually that the country was going to go to war. And, and he struggles to remember very short-term things, but his memory about that seemed pretty intact. And one of my very most favorite things about being in touch with so many people sort of at the edge of life, right? So in their 90s, and I have several patients that are over 100, is just that opportunity of asking these really cool questions of what must it have been like? What was it like to be there when you heard that? And when Nana lived with us, that was usually one of my favorite topics to go through. What was it like to live through all the different war eras? What was it like to live through the Nixon scandal and the market crashes and so forth? And to be honest, sometimes it was kind of like underwhelming. Like, she'd just be like, it seemed fine, seemed unaffected. She kind of lived on a farm and I'm not sure was, obviously not as in touch as our kids now with current events, because you had maybe a TV much later in her life, but mostly the radio and then the newspaper, if she even bothered to read the newspaper at a young age. So weren't a lot of sources of information. And so I had to remind myself that my children's life is being shaped by an incredibly high access to real-time information that wasn't available or part of other people growing up many, many years ago. So I was thinking about this Greenland shark and thinking, wow, it's sure I've seen a lot. I'd love to sit down and talk to it. And then I was like, well, maybe not. Probably not possible. But anyway, going back to some other things about the shark is exquisitely adapted to its environment. And one of the reasons it gets to live so long and grow so big is because it doesn't have a lot of natural predators and it fits very perfectly within the environment. And I know we talk about that, especially the last podcast we did about just helping whatever stage you are in life, the environment serving you and serving whatever new needs you may have. So specifically for the Greenland shark, it has lower and lower vision over time. And what are some things that you do inside your own home to help with vision that is maybe having some more challenges over time? And one of the main things that we look at is lighting, making sure there's good lighting. We can call it task lighting. So if somebody's sitting down to balance a checkbook or work on a computer, making sure there's good lighting in that area. Good lighting near fall zones like the bathroom, the path from the bedroom to the bathroom, also in the kitchen or other slippery areas, making sure there's good lighting in and out of the house. Also with lower vision, you want to have good contrast. And so if there is, like, say, an object, an island or a desk or a piece of furniture, that it's perhaps not the same exact color as the floor beneath it or a super similar color, so that the brain is picking up on contrast between these two particular shades. There's one little trick you can do if you happen to be remodeling a bathroom, and that's to put a horizontal stripe of tile or acrylic or whatever you're doing inside the bathroom, and having it, say if the surround is a light colored tile or acrylic, and you have one strip of a dark color just above, like, eye level, so that there's a dark contrast that looks like a horizon. And that helps people with lower vision sort of stabilize their gaze, especially in places like the shower, which can be kind of disorienting because it can get hot and there can be steam. It can be difficulty in maintaining your balance. It's already kind of a slippery surface anyway. And so having that horizontal stripe, which is in both our master bathroom and in the bathroom Nana was in, can help kind of just that native need to stabilize and look for a horizon. So if you're somebody like me that gets car sick, finding horizons can be really helpful to help correct that. And then if you look at somebody who's just come off of like a merry-go-round and their eyes are kind of bouncing all around, helping them kind of stabilize, get still, and find a horizon kind of helps that system in the brain reorient, if you will. Other things you can do with low vision is to make sure that pathways not only are well lit, but also decluttered. People with lower vision may not identify small objects in the way that you could slip on or you could trip on or even just like stub your toe. So other things that may benefit from being high contrast, and again, I say contrast, it could be the surrounding area is dark and the item is light or vice versa. It doesn't really matter. You can think about door frames, like this is where you're turning. This is the area to come in to the next room. You can think of light switch plates. A lot of people have light switch plates that are basically the same color as everything around it. Can be hard to find. Handrails. So if you are going to invest and put handrails, say that second handrail up and down a staircase. A lot of we talked about this last time, but a lot of stairs, they don't necessarily come with a handrail down the wall side of the stairs. But if you do end up placing handrails, having them contrasted with the wall next to them so they're easy to grab, especially in low light situations. The other thing is also just for orientation. I think a really good digital clock that's easy to read and has high contrast and bright against the area around it can be very helpful for orientation. It is for me. I had one at the wall as you exit our back door until Athena hit it with the volleyball and now it's broken. But that was my favorite clock. In fact, that's the second time she did that because the first time the middle digit in the clock stopped working. But anyway, that is really helpful to me. It kind of keeps me on task. It even has the date displayed. And when I'm in a patient's room and there's an adult child there, I'm usually suggesting, hey, the clocks that come with the room are those 8-inch circle clocks that have the hour hand and the minute hand, and they can be really hard to see. I actually have very few patients who can literally see that clock on the wall because it's about, I don't know, maybe 10 feet away from where they're seated in their bed. And so one of the first things I'll ask is, do you mind bringing up if they have a digital clock that could sit at the nightstand or nearby? And that'd be really helpful with orientation. So anyway, that was my little aside on the Greenland shark having vision problems and what we can do about that to help with that. The other thing that was curious to me was the emphasis on how slow this shark moves. And I know when I'm walking with friends or family, I tend to be the one walking way out ahead of everyone. That's probably just anxiety and habit. And the one time I was not walking with a purpose and focused ahead, I tripped and broke my knee. And so I learned a lesson there. But the idea is that it seems normal to me that life slows down and mobility slows down as an adaptation to some of the changes with aging. That can be arthritic pain in the back, shoulders, knees, etc. That can also just be a lifestyle choice. I actually hope there's a day where I don't walk that fast. And I hope that I can look at things and stop and slow down. And actually, I thought about this after I broke my knee, was what if I had just taken a minute to stand there? I was looking for something that was hard to find, and I was trying to be efficient and keep walking and looking at the same time and slowing my own life down enough to where I could have just stopped and looked for what I was trying to find, and maybe even have found it. I was probably walking 20 or 30 feet in front of the rest of the group. Why didn't I have time to sit down or just stand there and look for something I was, wanting to find some joy out of, to find this Medusa figure? And so, sorry, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, there's a whole other podcast about my knee. This thing happened back in July. But the idea is, and I don't mean this in an insulting way, oh, they slow down and they look slower, they act slower. The whole idea is there is a lot of pleasure to be had in you having the control over the pace, that you're not in some rat race of a life where you're always walking at top speeds and running through life. One of the things I savor most is when you can slow those things down. I always thought it was interesting because I always think about it the body slows you down, maybe in the second half of life, maybe starting when you're in your 30s, depending on your aches and pains, but slows you down in a way that helps you experience life differently. Like if you're not going to slow down, then your body's going to slow you down. And when you think about it, then in terms of the Greenland shark, being slow is the key to longevity. Being deliberate and conserving energy is the key to longevity. And so in some ways, having that slower life where you can enjoy things, where you can plan things, where your life isn't chock full all the time, where you're not overcommitted and you're not having your calendar bursting at the seams all the time. Like, what an incredible gift to have any period of your life where you really do get to slow down. And again, that can be from a mobility perspective, that you're physically moving through life a little bit slower, maybe, stopping and smelling the roses literally. Or maybe it's also just slowing down the demands on your time and attention, just slowing down on the number of things that you're participating in. And I can kind of see that. We kind of think of retirement as a rough demarcation of when things really finally get to slow down. And so I kind of think of this Greenland shark as like always retired. Like it's literally just surfing the bottom of the ocean, very, very, very slowly surfing, maybe like I don't know, too generous of a word, but, going on the bottom of the ocean, eating very slowly, metabolizing very slowly, and living a very, very, very long time. All right, I'm almost done with all these curiosities, but there were a couple more that I found really interesting. One thing that scientists have noticed is that this particular animal is very easy to catch, and it has quote unquote minimum resistance when captured. Do you think that's funny?
It's like, yeah, whatever. All right. My life isn't worth living anymore.
No. Okay, I wasn't thinking Ari's joined me for the last part of this podcast. No, I was thinking more like it is in tune with the universe, and it just kind of goes along with it. It goes with the flow. And even when it's getting captured, it's like,
meh.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And then again, I was like, who's capturing these large sharks at the bottom of the ocean? Like, who's hunting them? Like, what is even going on there? But anyway, so it can't raise its body temperature above that of the icy waters. So it doesn't really adapt if it's like pulled out of its environment. And the question is, if it grows up to like 20 to 25 feet long, then how is it getting enough food? That's the question. And I know people like this that don't eat a lot, but still live. And maybe they are part Greenland shark, because I don't know if they're eating enough to actually sustain life. But scientists are still wondering like how this particular animal, can sustain its super large body on small amounts of food.
Well, I mean, you can look at cell theory and see like the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, and you have vacuoles which store water and food, and you can just say like maybe its cells work differently, and maybe its cells are in like a long-term mode. So like if you look into cell theory a lot and how plants and animals conserve energy and with what food they were given, that's also really important.
Okay, so they're actually not just subsisting as a scavenger. They are actually predators and eat large, fast-moving prey, even though they themselves are very large. In fact, one article we read said that they're actually deceptive, that they're like super slow on the bottom of the ocean, and they see something they want to eat, and they become like ferocious, agile creatures that go after what they want and then get their prey and then go back to like this unassuming, like slow character.
Much like people.
No, not all people. No. They're very hard to study, according to most of the articles I read. And there's only one recorded shark attacked by this kind of shark, and it was like back in 1859. And there was a report of a human leg and a shark's stomach, but that was the only confirmed attack by this kind of shark. And so that's probably because of where they live, and there's not a lot of humans where they live.
They literally live at the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, no, but not just any ocean, a cold ocean.
Oh, right.
Like near freezing. So that's where they prefer to be.
Well, if you're in like cold waters, you don't really need a lot of energy, because like you get preserved basically.
Right. And so the article is saying that they could turn and accelerate suddenly and outmaneuver and outswim the divers that are studying them. So perhaps this article concludes they are not sluggish, blind, scent-oriented scavengers, but maybe they're active, curious, highly capable predators.
But 99% of the time, they're just kind of slow, but then that 1%, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do they eat
And very
faster than
slow.
we?
I don't know. So they call it a slow-moving zombie-like creature that captures agile prey.
How do you capture agile?
I don't know. Yeah. Still much to be known about these animals. Anyway, okay, I know that was kind of off the wall. I like doing these kind of podcasts every once in a while. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week. Hey everyone, it's Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'd like to take just a moment to review the disclaimer. This podcast is for informational and occasional entertainment purposes only. Nothing discussed here is formal medical, legal, or financial advice. By listening to the podcast, we are not creating a patient-doctor relationship between you and myself or any of the guests. Really, it's just me and a possible guest or two, sometimes 3, sitting around talking about difficult topics related to aging parents. If you have or suspect that you might have a medical problem or condition, you should seek advice from a licensed medical professional. If you have any questions or concerns, please read the full disclaimer in the show notes or contact me directly. Thank you again for joining us today. I can't wait to see you next week. Have a good day.